Be prepared for extra screening. We check in with airports on the first day of the Real ID enforcement.
Which is so funny because it's like, oh, so if I have a star, you're going to make me go through additional identification.
I brought my ID, my passport, just to be on the safe side.
A husband tries to save his wife from an alligator attack in Florida. We hear from authorities on what happened moments before the deadly encounter.
She ended up on top of the alligator in the water and was bitten. Her husband attempted to intervene, but was unsuccessful.
And a live look at the Vatican, where cardinals will vote again tomorrow after black smoke poured out of the Sistine Chapel chimney. But first, we begin with breaking news. The jury reached a verdict in the trial of 3 former Memphis police officers charged in the death of Tyre Nichols. So Nichols was pulled over in 2023 for reckless driving and subsequently pepper sprayed and beaten. He was hospitalized and died 3 days later. So let's get right to CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca. He's been covering this. Certainly a disturbing case, and now the verdict. So tell us what happened in the courtroom.
All right, this is the state case that we're talking about. And the 3 officers are Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. They were found not guilty by the jury in downtown Memphis. And their charges ranged from second-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, official misconduct, official oppression. Well, the jury found all of them not guilty on the state level. Little background here. On the federal level, there was already a trial, and they have pled guilty or were found guilty, but they were found guilty on lesser charges, excessive force, and witness tampering. There had not been any punishment that had been handed out on the federal level. They were waiting to see punishment on the state level. But since they were not guilty on the state level, now everybody, including the family, is looking to see what kind of punishment the feds are going to give out. Now, Paul Hagerman, one of the assistant district attorneys, spoke just after the jury read their verdict. He had talked to the family, and here's what he had to say.
We spoke to them briefly. Obviously, they were devastated. I think you could imagine that they would be devastated. I think they were outraged, and I think we can understand why they'd be outraged by this result, given the evidence. They quite understandably decided that they needed to go home and process all this, and we're going to give them that respect and respect their privacy.
Now, what's interesting about this is that when the video came out of body camera and these sky cams of the beating, you saw officers punching, kicking, pepper spraying, using batons on Tyre Nichols. There was outrage in the city. There were protests on the streets there in Memphis, and streets were shut down. There was a heavy police presence because people thought that video was going to be enough. The federal trial happened, lesser charges, they were found guilty, and now with these state charges, folks are still in shock, not sure what's going to happen and what kind of punishment. The officers have been fired, of course, but what kind of punishment and possible jail time, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, and there was a big concern about pre-trial publicity, and that's why the trial was moved out of that area. So now we then look into the makeup of the jury. Can you tell us a little bit more about the jurors?
Yeah, and let me clarify that. By moving, they kept the trial in Memphis, but the jury, Memphis is Shelby County area. The jury is not from Shelby County. The jury is from Hamilton County, 300 plus miles away on the other side of Tennessee. So the makeup, these folks don't live in the Memphis area. Memphis being a predominantly African-American city, and Hamilton County and Chattanooga are not. And that is something that people are talking about, and on social media you're hearing reporters talk to people about it as well. Now granted, we don't see what the jury looks like. From what we understand, there's no cameras that are allowed to pan to a jury, but we understand there's no African Americans on that jury that just rendered that verdict of not guilty. Now, whether any of the members of the jury talk, we're waiting to see if anyone will talk to kind of see what happened, what went on in that jury room that changed their mind to or moved them in one direction or the other. Because as the general public, we see the video, but what were they seeing? What arguments worked for them that made them come up with their decision?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see if a juror does speak to that. All right, Omar, thank you so much. All right, let's go back to the Vatican now, where black smoke coming from the Sistine Chapel signifying that a new pope has not been selected just yet. 133 cardinals have been locked inside the chapel for hours, taking an oath of secrecy as they begin the process to pick Pope Francis's successor. And our map gives a better look and a better view of Vatican City. So the electors are locked inside the Sistine Chapel during the voting. It is one of the oldest methods of electing a head of state. There is no time limit set for how long a conclave can take. And then you can see here just a very start of the conclave. Not everyone involved filed out of the Sistine Chapel after participating in a special mass. And then the doors closed with the voting cardinals sealed inside, meaning the conclave can begin. So CBS News papal contributor Frank Rocca joining us live now. Frank, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell us more about how the conclave works?
Well, you described the beginning of it, and so the cardinals tonight they took longer than usual, and they only had one ballot. That may be partially because there were 133 of them as opposed to 115 the last conclave in 2013. Maybe because at the beginning they hear some preaching. Maybe because they still have to learn the procedures. A lot of them haven't voted for. It should go a little more smoothly tomorrow, when there'll be 2 ballots in the morning and 2 ballots in the afternoon until we get a pope. In the last couple of elections, it's happened in 2 days, so there's a good bet it could happen again tomorrow, but it could go longer. Some cardinals want a longer conclave to be able to perhaps promote some dark horses or less obvious candidates than the front runners.
Yeah, speaking of candidates, let's talk about the 133 cardinals participating in the conclave and what we know about them.
Well, it's the most geographically diverse group in history, that's for sure. Pope Francis named the first cardinals in history from about 24 countries, including Tonga and Myanmar, Papua New Guinea. And so these men come from all over the world. They don't know each other very well because they haven't met very often. Pope Francis didn't call them together as often as his predecessors. So put that together and you've had a couple weeks now, more or less, of them trying to get to know each other before they went into the conclave. But there still might be a lot of unfamiliarity and a lot of guesswork, and they have relied on the press to a great extent up until now to inform them.
Frank Rocca, good insight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And stay with CBS News 24/7 for continuing coverage of the conclave. We will have live reports from Rome and Vatican City all day. All right, right now we are watching Wall Street as investors react to the Federal Reserve's decision to hold interest rates steady for the 3rd straight meeting. The closing bell rang just moments ago, the Dow up 284 points. So let's take a look at our interactive stock market heat map. This is brought to you by FinViz. It shows the top 500 stocks. After a shaky day in the markets, a good number of these boxes actually landed in the green. Stocks wavered as the Fed Chair Jerome Powell warned tariffs could bring turbulence to the U.S. economy. Let's take a listen.
The tariff increases announced so far have been significantly larger than anticipated. All of these policies are still evolving, however, and their effects on the economy remain highly uncertain. As economic conditions evolve, we'll continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the outlook, and the balance of risks. If the large increases in tariffs that have been announced are sustained, they're likely to generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment. The effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. It is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent.
CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins us live from the New York Stock Exchange. Hi, Kelly. Help us give us some takeaways from Powell's comments. I know that you're so good at analyzing every single word and what it may mean.
Well, that's very kind praise coming from you, Jules. Look, I think the headline here is the Fed still feels that the economy is in a good spot, but they are between a rock and a hard place when it comes to predicting the future. I was counting, or rather I lost count, on how many times Fed Chair Powell said uncertainty. So 3 major takeaways for you. The first is that Powell emphasized over and over the hard data still shows that the economy is in a good spot. Inflation has been cooling and the labor market still remains strong. Remember, those are the 2 mandates that the Fed has to look at. And in fact, my colleague Jolene Kent was in the room. She pressed Chair Powell on saying, okay, you say the economic data is there, but Main Street is really struggling and can't really wait and see the way that the Fed wants to. And he said, look, I'm looking at the data. I just don't know what is coming next. And that brings me to my next 2 takeaways. Stagflation. Okay, that means high inflation, slow growth, economic growth was kind of the unspoken theme of the day, because Powell said that there is increased risks of higher inflation and higher unemployment because of these tariffs. And that is part of what is driving this wait and see approach, because they need to see how all of this impacts that hard economic data. They don't want to make a preemptive move. He was very clear about that. And the final thing, Jules, I feel like this is a little bit flying under the radar, but it made my eyebrows go, whoa, when he said this. He said, in response to a question of, should we even get a rate cut at all this year if there's all this uncertainty? And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, it's uncertain. We don't really know how things are going to go. We don't want to make a preemptive move. I'm not really sure where we're going to go with this. So what I took away from that, the Fed did not share how many rate cuts they plan to make this year, is that we may not even get one, Jules. So that was sort of a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Okay, so let's talk about the obvious. How are investors reacting?
Very choppy trading today, especially when that announcement came out. And I noticed when the point that I just made, when Fed Chair Powell was kind of iffy on the rate cut question, the Dow went like this. Investors immediately reacted to the fact that there may not be rate cuts. But overall, we still ended positive with all 3 major indexes, because they liked hearing, hey, we're in an okay spot. The Fed still feels confident about where we are. I think where you saw sort of the most concern was in the NASDAQ. It's a very tech-heavy index. Tech companies want interest rate cuts because they want to be able to invest more cheaply in artificial intelligence. But still, we ended up, I would say, tepidly in the green today.
Okay, all right, but then let's focus on Google, because its stock tumbled today. So what's going on there?
So Google, right? Big search engine. A lot of their money comes from that. Well, if you open your Safari browser on your iPhone, that is the default search engine that comes up, google.com. And today, in the antitrust trial that we've been following, a senior Apple executive said that they are considering not having the Google search engine be the default when you open up, because AI search engines, they think that is the future. That's why Google stock went down 7.5%. It closed down because that's a really big driver for them of all those people using it. Now, Apple didn't say this is for sure. They just said it's something that they're considering, Jules.
All right, good information. Thanks so much, Kelly O'Grady. Appreciate it. After 20 years of delays, the Real ID deadline is finally here. Travelers at airports across the country need to show their real IDs to board flights in the U.S. If you don't have one yet, you can still fly, but be prepared to go through some additional screening. Meantime, at Newark Airport, the FAA says it is taking steps to alleviate ongoing delays and cancellations. Disruptions started last Monday when air traffic control crews saw their screens go dark for at least 30 seconds and lost all communication with flights in Newark. So tomorrow, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is expected to announce the details of a plan to revamp the air traffic control system nationwide. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez joining us live from Nashville International Airport as the Real ID enforcement begins. Hi, Nicole. How are things going? How are TSA lines? I'm trying to look behind you. Doesn't look too crowded, but it's always hit and miss at an airport.
Yeah, hey, that's the good news, right, is that we're not seeing those major impacts that some airports initially feared on the first day of that enforcement. And part of the reason is because TSA says, look, we're not turning anyone away, even if you don't have a real ID today. There are several alternative documents that you can show to still make it onto your flight. That includes a passport, a global entry card, a military ID. If you don't have any of those, there is also another option that you can just go through what will be called more additional screening. So people here at National International, they don't have any of those IDs. They're getting this red slip, and then they're being escorted to an area where they will be getting additional screening. And that really is just a way for security guards here at TSA to verify your identity another way. They don't want to turn people away. However, this is a state that reports only about 50% compliance in the real ID situation. So I think overall what they're still hoping is that people will still work to get their real ID sooner rather than later, even though we are past the deadline. Because even though you're not seeing major impacts at most airports across the country just yet, they do worry about the impending summer break, major holidays like Memorial Day, the 4th of July, busier travel holidays where you could start to see longer wait times if more people still don't have the real ID by then.
Ah, yes, that will be the real test. Okay, you kind of touched on it. Passengers who don't have a real ID, what kinds of extra steps or delays are they facing? They get that red card, they have to go in a special line, but I'm sure that takes time, right?
It will take more time, and that's why officials are saying if you don't have that ID, you want to get to the airport well before your flight. You don't want to be cutting it close because, look, there's a chance you could miss it if you have to go through that additional screening. There are some airports who are having a separate line for people to make if they don't have that ID. That's not the case at this airport. They're still being asked to make that regular line through security, and they will just be pulled to the side for additional screening if it comes down to it at that point.
All right, Nicole Valdez, thank you so much. Good information. Another U.S. fighter jet ends up in the bottom of the Red Sea. What we know about the latest Pentagon mishap next. For the second time in 8 days, an F-18 fighter jet assigned to aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman has been lost overboard in the Red Sea. This is just one of many incidents involving the USS Truman in the last 6 months. In December 2024, a fighter jet was shot down by friendly fire from the USS Gettysburg. The aircrew ejected safely in that incident. In February, the USS Truman accidentally collided with a merchant vessel near the Suez Canal. And just last month, the USS Truman lost an F-18 fighter jet. Yesterday, the latest fighter jet was lost. So CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata has more details on the latest incident.
For the second time in just 9 days, an F-18 Super Hornet fighter jet aboard the Truman has ended up at the bottom of the Red Sea. A U.S. defense official tells CBS News the jet was coming into land Tuesday when it failed to catch the wire known as a failed arrestment, sending a $70 million aircraft overboard. Both pilots safely ejected and were rescued by a helicopter. They're recovering from minor injuries. Just last week, another Super Hornet rolled off the hangar deck while being towed. One sailor was hurt there. The Truman has been deployed in the Red Sea since the fall, leading strikes against Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen. The Pentagon's chief spokesperson confirmed in a post Tuesday night the DoD is monitoring the situation and that aircraft was not struck by the Houthis. Despite the recent mishaps, officials say the strike group remains fully mission capable. An investigation into both incidents is now underway. Charlie D'Agata, CBS News, Washington.
On to rising tensions in Southeast Asia. Pakistan says 26 people are dead after India carried out strikes across the border into Pakistani-administered territory. This escalation comes just 2 weeks after the deadly attack in Kashmir. So let's go to our breaking news correspondent, Chanel Call, in the CBS newsroom. So what are the latest developments in the conflict, Chanel?
Well, Jules, these two countries now appear to be on the brink of war. Those strikes you mentioned into Pakistan early Wednesday morning local time were essentially in response to that terror attack that took place in Kashmir about 2 weeks ago. 26 civilians were killed. Most of them we now know were Hindu and Indian tourists. India has blamed Pakistan for the attack, which notably was the deadliest attack against civilians in India in 17 years. Now, overnight, the Indian government retaliated. It says it forces has struck 9 sites in Pakistan. And then this morning, Pakistani officials said the overall death toll now risen to at least 31 people. Pakistan's prime minister has described the attack as a, quote, act of war and is vowing to respond. And remember, these are two nuclear-armed countries with large air forces, and so both sides have weapons that can do some really serious damage here. President Trump responded to these rising tensions earlier today. Take a listen.
It's so terrible. My position is I get along with both. I know both very well, and I want to see them work it out. I want to see them stop. And hopefully they can stop now. They've gone tit for tat, so hopefully they can stop now. But I know both. We get along with both countries very well, good relationships with both, and I want to see it stop. And if I can do anything to help, I will be there.
So Trump appearing to be sort of towing the line there. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also doing the same on X earlier today, saying that he was keeping a close eye on the situation, adding that Washington would continue to engage the Asian neighbors to reach a, quote, peaceful resolution.
So, Chanel, can you give us a bit of history about the tensions between India and Pakistan? I know that there's a lot of history to go into, but just briefly, kind of the tensions that have escalated.
Yeah, there's been decades of conflict in this particular region. These are sworn enemies we're talking about, India and Pakistan. But this all really started during the partition. So that's when the British rule ended in India in 1947. And that's also when Pakistan and India became two countries. India, majority Hindu, and Pakistan, majority Muslim. Those two sides have fought repeated wars since that partition, with Kashmir remaining this flashpoint in the war. But this bombing overnight, really a significant escalation. The whole world is now watching.
Yeah, Chanel Call. Chanel, thank you. A deadly alligator attack in Florida. What we know about the victim next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. A federal appeals court ordered the Trump administration to transfer detained international student Rumeysa Ozturk from Louisiana to Vermont while legal proceedings play out. So the court sided with a lower court's ruling to move Ozturk to Vermont, where she was detained when her lawyers first filed a petition challenging her detainment. The Trump administration has until May 14th to comply with the transfer order. Ozturk has a bail hearing scheduled for this Friday, May 9th, in Vermont. It is day 3 of jury selection in the sex trafficking and racketeering trial of Sean Diddy Combs in New York. Potential jurors asked yesterday if they were ever the victim of sexual assault or harassment. The hip-hop artist has been in custody since September on federal charges. Opening statements in his trial are expected to start next week. A tragic story out of Florida. Authorities say a woman who was canoeing with her husband was killed by an alligator. Officials say the 61-year-old woman was sitting in the bow of a 14-foot canoe when the attack happened. Her husband tried to fight off the gator, but was unsuccessful.
While alligator attacks resulting in fatalities are extremely rare, this tragedy serves as a somber reminder of the powerful wildlife that share our natural spaces.
Officials say they recovered 2 alligators, one of them matching the length and description of the gator involved in the incident. Jumping the map now to Texas, a man rescued after his car was swept off by floodwaters. Officials say he was trying to evacuate his home, which sits near a creek. First responders broke into the driver's side window to pull the man out of his car yesterday. It took them 10 minutes to get him out of harm's way. The car was fully submerged. In 15 minutes, the driver did not suffer any major injuries. All right, a look at New Orleans now, where Louisiana is bracing for several rounds of heavy rain and thunderstorms this week. So let's bring in meteorologist Zoe Mintz to talk about that. And as you were just saying, it just takes a couple inches of rain, and that's deadly and dangerous in itself.
And over the past 24 hours, there has been 7 to 8 inches of rain that has fallen across parts of Texas, Louisiana, and that same storm system is bullseye over New Orleans right now. So that rain continuing, but there is good news. It's actually getting quieter as the evening progresses. The heaviest rain has already fallen. Let's take a look at some of those totals because, again, down near Texas and Louisiana, these are the highest numbers that we have seen, and it's the reason that we're looking at widespread river levels that are very, very high. 7 to 8 inches of rain in just 24 hours. Again, flash flooding still going to be a major concern as this storm system is still making its way across the deep south. As you can see, a lot of rain fell yesterday, and that rain continuing to surge across Louisiana and Mississippi. Right now, as you can see, though, it's beginning to kind of dissipate. And as it does continue to dissipate, we'll be noticing this bullseye that is directly over New Orleans, southern Mississippi, and Louisiana. It will continue to ease up. We are still expecting upwards of maybe 3 inches of rain on top of the 7 to 8, which will lead to the potential for on top of already saturated soils. Not the greatest news, but the system will continue to depart, and just a few more isolated showers will continue into the early morning hours. Let's break down the timing of the system as it continues to make its way farther east into the overnight hours. Again, it's not going to progress much farther than what it already is. It's going to move offshore, maybe bringing an isolated thunderstorm over near Florida, and then by the early morning hours, maybe just the southernmost tip of Louisiana dealing with a little bit more of that rain. It's by tomorrow afternoon and evening that we are going to be dealing with 2 different areas of thunderstorms, one over near Texas and then one across the central and eastern part of the United States. These 2 areas have the potential for severe weather tomorrow afternoon and evening, which is why we do have that slight risk for a few isolated tornadoes, maybe even a little bit of large hail and damaging wind gusts that will persist. But again, our biggest issue over the next 24 hours is going to be the additional rainfall on top of the already extremely heavy rain and the already saturated soils. Again, 7 to 8 inches. It only takes 6 inches to wash you off your feet. So that does mean stay inside, stay off the roads, turn around, don't drown. Things will be drying up, though, over the next 24 to 48 hours. So hopefully those river levels can continue to subside.
Yeah, stay in, be patient, be smart about it. All right,
exactly.
So thank you. Some popular children's toys could be impacted by Trump's tariffs. We're going to speak to the CEO of a major toy company about what it means for your birthday and holiday celebrations. Next, you're watching CBS News 24/7. An icebreaker trade meeting between the U.S. and China is now just days away. This weekend, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer will sit down with their Chinese counterparts in Switzerland. So let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about this hearing and what's ahead of this key meeting.
Yeah, this is the big news that we got word of yesterday and are learning a bit more about today. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Trade Representative Jamieson Greer will meet with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng this weekend in Switzerland. In a radio interview just now, President Trump said that Saturday would be the day that they would be meeting. And this is the first notable official meeting on tariffs between the U.S. and China ever since President Trump announced his, quote, reciprocal tariffs of up to 145% on Chinese goods. China responded with its own 125% tariff. And China has signaled in recent weeks that they would come to the negotiation table if the U.S. lowered their tariffs on China. President Trump was asked if he would do that ahead of this weekend's meeting. Take a listen to what he said in the Oval Office.
China says in order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
Yeah, quick answer there from the president, who was in the Oval Office to swear in actually the U.S. ambassador to China, former Senator Scott Perdue. During that event, he said that a big part of negotiations with China and what they want from them is for them to stop the flow of fentanyl coming in through U.S. Borders. He also pushed back on Chinese officials saying that the U.S. Initiated these talks, made the first call, and said that China should, quote, go back and study their files. Now, on Capitol Hill, in a hearing, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that White House Economic Trade Advisor Peter Navarro, who had been a bit more of a bull when it comes to being more aggressive on these, quote, reciprocal tariffs, he will not be with them in Switzerland. And in that radio interview earlier this afternoon, President Trump said that they could bring up the case of Jimmy Lai. That is the jailed Hong Kong media owner who President Trump has talked about freeing on the campaign trail, and has been a point of potential tension between the U.S. and China. So interesting to see if that case will be brought up during this weekend's talks.
And Aaron, the president touched on a number of other topics, including Gaza. So fill us in.
Yeah, he seemed to tease some potential news there on Gaza, saying that we, quote, will probably know something within the next 24 hours. He, of course, the president is going to Saudi Arabia and the Middle East next week. He also said he did not know about sending migrants to Libya. CBS News has reported that that is something that immigration officials here in the U.S. had been looking to do, though Libya's prime minister said that that will not be happening. And he also signed a proclamation for what he has called Victory Day, commemorating May 8 tomorrow as Victory Day for World War I, as well as another holiday per se in November that coincides with Veterans Day.
Aaron Navarro. Aaron, thank you. One industry reeling from President Donald Trump's tariffs, America's toy makers. According to data from the Toy Association, the U.S. toy industry imports about 80% of its products from China. So let's bring in Jay Foreman, the CEO of Basic Fun, a toy maker selling household brand names like, okay, let me get the right list here. We're talking about Little Pony, Care Bear, Tonka toys, Tonka trucks, Lincoln Logs, oh my gosh, just to name a few. Obviously, we've all had these at some point or given them as gifts. So my question to you, will manufacturing continue? What's happening?
Sure, yeah, well, it's different for all companies, but for our company, we're manufacturing all the toys our customers were planning and are planning on carrying this Christmas. The problem is nothing is shipping from across from China over the Pacific, because at 145% tariff rate, the tariff is just too high for retailers to consider increasing the cost of that merchandise and bringing it in. So we're all waiting and sitting on pins and needles, waiting for Secretary Bessent, hopefully this weekend, to have his meeting in Switzerland, and also maybe President Trump and President Xi to, lower the temperature a little bit and maybe bring the tariffs down to a much more reasonable level in the next few days.
Okay, so let's get specific. Let's say we're talking about Care Bears, for example. How much do they cost right now, and how much will they cost if the tariffs go into effect? What will the price difference be?
Sure. I just happen to have a Care Bear right here. He's grumpy. So on a regular day today, this Care Bear sells for between $12.99 and $14.99. With 145% tariffs, this toy would be $30, more than double. If the tariffs went down to about 54%, it would be $20. And if they went to 10%, which is the universal tariff rate, there would be no change in price for the consumer, as we've worked out ways with our retailers and vendors to absorb 10%, but any more than 10% would be a price increase, and today's tariffs would double the cost of this item.
So have any toy shipments already been halted because of the tariffs?
Yes, I mean, almost all shipments out of China, not just on toys, but most products for the most part have been halted. We got about 35 containers of product out just before the tariffs, actually 28 of them before the 145% tariff took hold. And about 8 of them actually got out the next day, and they're going to be tagged with 145%. But outside of that, if you don't have goods on the water before the 145 took hold, and you don't have inventory in stock, you don't have anything to sell right now. And that's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of companies, especially smaller mom and pop and independent toy companies, what I call the Shark Tank generation, all those people that have created products and companies out of their garage and their homes. They're going to be most impacted by these tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so could we actually see some toys disappear from the shelves? And I know we're months away, but there's the Christmas list that are going to start appearing.
For sure. I mean, while Christmas, of course, is 8 months away, 7 months away, this peak shipping season for the holidays and back to school and Halloween is all happening right now. First impacts you'll see are a lot less items and a lot more expensive items from back to school. Then you'll start to see shortages and increases in the cost of Halloween merchandise. And finally, you'll see shortages and increase in prices on Christmas presents, toys in particular, as well as all the Christmas decorations, the trees, the lights, the ornaments. So this is like dominoes falling on so many categories of product. You'll see less product, you'll see more expensive product, and certainly the things you're most going to want to buy. Those top items on your children's Christmas list, those are going to go first, and they're going to be the most expensive.
All right, so the big picture, Trump says he hopes tariffs bring manufacturing back to the United States. So is this something that you are planning to do?
Well, I can tell you that there are toys made in the United States right now, things like Little Tykes, and we make Lincoln Logs and Connects and Tinker Toys here. Folks make Slinky and other products, but bringing production back here is a little bit more challenging. Lego, the largest toy company in the world, is actually opening up a highly automated facility in Virginia in 2027, and I'm working with leaders in our industry, and we're putting together what we call the American Toy Works, and that's going to be a 2 million square foot manufacturing facility located in the southwestern United States that'll manufacture toys. But that factory won't be ready until 27 and fully operational until 28. So in the meantime, to keep the toy industry alive and keep Christmas what it always is for kids, we need the president and the administration not to be Scrooge and Grinch, but actually to bring tariffs down so we can all bring Christmas in at the right price for parents.
I'm looking at all your toys behind you, the Care Bears, the different colors, the trucks, all that fun stuff. All right, Jay, thank you so much from Basic Fun. We got to keep the fun alive, right?
Absolutely. Let's hope alive. Bring those tariffs down.
All right, we'll stay in touch. Jay Foreman, thank you. An alarming discovery at a high-rise building in Florida, forcing dozens of people to evacuate. Next. Stay with us. You're watching CBS News 24/7. In Florida, people ordered to evacuate from a high-rise building after construction workers found a large crack in a pillar underneath the building. This is in the city of Clearwater, west of Tampa. So here is CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez.
That situation is unfolding on the west coast of Florida, where Clearwater Beach authorities say that Condo building, a 12-story building, had to be evacuated after crews that were doing construction work on the first floor garage noticed a large crack on a pillar. They said that crack was several feet wide, clearly a cause for concern. So authorities were called. They were brought in to evacuate the building. A total of 60 people had to find somewhere else to spend the night, and now they're waiting to see when the building will be stabilized, as that work is going on, with no clue of when they may be able to return. All of this, of course, brings back horrible memories of what happened here in South Florida. Back in 2021, the Surfside building collapsed, which killed 98 people. And ever since that happened, the state passed a law that increases the frequency of which condo buildings have to have inspections, and also makes them have cash on hand, reserves that are required in case fixes need to be made. And it has happened. In fact, one building not far from us was shut down for 3 years, essentially, after several problems were discovered, and they had to be fixed. People were just 3 years later allowed to get back into those condos. So again, this is something that causes headaches and causes a lot of expenses for people. But the state and many people we have spoken with say that all of this is necessary to ensure that another Surfside does not happen again. Back to you.
We've been talking about it for days now. The Real ID requirement is now in effect at airports nationwide and at federal buildings and military bases. It is a story our CBS News stations across the country are covering. We start with CBS News Texas.
A lot of people don't know that this is taking effect today. So the Real ID is marked with a star in the upper right-hand corner of your driver's license. Now, the star will either usually be black or gold, depending on the state. And starting today, if you are flying and do not have a Real ID, well, prepare to face additional screening and likely delays at the airport.
There's plenty of information here at the airport. They have a flyer that they're giving away. They also have this sign right behind me letting you know, yes, today is the day to make sure that you have your real ID so you can be able to go through the airport, because starting today, anyone without a real ID compliant driver's license or state issued ID will be unable to use it to board domestic flights or certain federal facilities.
This new Real ID requirement hasn't slowed down operations too much this morning here at Philadelphia International Airport. Take a look. We've seen some short lines here at security for terminals D and E, as a lot of these passengers came prepared with their Real ID, while the airport staff was ready for those who did not.
All right, we want to get to some breaking news now. We're getting reports that protesters have taken over Butler Library on Columbia University's campus. Let's go to our breaking news correspondent, Chanel Call, in the CBS newsroom. Chanel, I know you just got a statement from Columbia University. What are they saying?
Right. So the university releasing this statement that says, in part, the university is responding and working to mitigate the situation. Let's show you the entire statement here. It says, unfortunately, the university is dealing with a disruption in reading room 301 of Butler Library. Columbia's public safety team is responding and working to mitigate the situation. Individuals have been asked for identification, which will be recorded and asked to disperse. They've been told that failure to comply will result in violations of our rules and policies and possible arrest. No individuals who have been protesting in the reading room have chosen at this point to identify themselves and depart. Individuals who were not involved in the protest have been allowed to leave. While this is isolated to one room in the library, it is completely unacceptable that some individuals are choosing to disrupt academic activities as our students are studying and preparing for final exams. These disruptions of our campus and academic activities will not be tolerated. Individuals found to be in violation of university rules and policies will face disciplinary consequences. We ask our community members to please avoid the immediate area near Butler Library in near term. And so, again, just want to mention that this just happening within the last hour this afternoon here in New York at Columbia University's main library. I don't think that we have video to show you just yet, but we're taking a look at what we're starting to see on social media. We need to verify that first before we can, of course, share that with you and our viewers. But it does appear they are pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and it does look like they're sort of rekindling the protests that we saw break out in college campuses really across the country last fall.
All right, Chanel Call. Chanel, thank you. In the eyes of U.S. Catholics, the next pope is going to have big shoes to fill. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, breaks down a new poll in our TikTok tube.
Here's the big number. You get wide approval among U.S. Catholics for the direction in which Pope Francis, in their mind, led the Catholic Church. And what that leads to then is, do they think that the next pope, whoever it is, ought to continue Pope Francis's teachings? And you do get a big number, 4 in 10, who say that the next pope ought to. There is a third that say, no, there should be more conservative teachings, and then another 21% who say, well, more progressive teachings. But the other thing here is, where does Francis leave the church? And this is what the next pope is going to be looking at. Before Pope Francis, fewer Catholics in the U.S. said that the church was in touch with the needs of Catholics, and that number over the course of the years went up to now where it's a majority. So that's the relatively better position that, in the minds of U.S. Catholics, the
Anthony Salvanto. Stay with CBS News 24/7 for continuing coverage of the conclave, and be sure to follow us on social media at the handle CBS News. America Decides with Caitlin Huey Burns is next, as Catholic cardinals from all over the world are gathered inside the Sistine Chapel to select a new pope. We will take a look at how the next pope could impact the Vatican's view on immigration. We'll leave you now with a live look at the Vatican, where this evening black smoke arose from the Sistine Chapel, signifying a new pope has not been elected. Today, after the first vote, the conclave of 133 Catholic cardinal electors will vote again tomorrow. We'll cover that and more. You're watching CBS News 24/7. America Decides, up next.